Well, welcome back to the webinar, everyone. We're going to be talking about 100 different ways to make sure your next hire is the right fit. And I truly believe that the future of hiring starts here. My name is Ira Wolfe. I know I know some of you. We've got a few new people on the line, and I really appreciate everyone taking the time out of their day to join me. Again, if you have any questions, I'm going to try to monitor the chat. I am here alone today, so I will try to keep an eye on the chat button. Please, if someone can actually text in there, make sure the sound's working, the slides are working. Otherwise, it's very lonely on this side. So if you can find that chat button and send me a message, I'd appreciate it. Good, got it. Thanks, Rick. So very good. I don't want to hold anybody else up here. I know everybody's on a tight schedule. I know a few people said they had to drop off early, and I do want to leave some time for questions and answers. And again, as things are going along, if you have questions, put them in the chat. I am going to be sending you the slides afterwards. There's also a couple articles that'll relate to this. I can send any sample reports. So if there's a sample that you're interested in, for one of the profiles or any additional information, again, just put it in the chat, and then I'll go back at the end and I'll monitor that and I'll get everything sent out. So again, appreciate everybody coming today for 100 plus ways to make sure your next hire is the right fit. So, make the slides go in order. Good. So let's talk about the agenda. I want to cover a couple things today. One is we're going to do a little bit of assessments 101, a little bit of background. Not going to spend a lot of time on that because I want to basically walk you through the system and do some comparisons and help you make a right decision. The goal is obviously to share one of the platforms that we're using here that I recommend, but some of the same the information you can use to apply to any other system. My goal is to help you make better decisions. And then again, we're going to talk about one of the systems that I highly recommend and compare it to others. So we're going to talk about the Assessments 101. We're going to talk about to build your own assessment or not to build. That comes up, just came up this morning again. Somebody said, well, what about, can we create our own questions? Going to talk about that. That also falls into one of the don'ts to do, but we'll talk about some of the do's and don'ts. That's very, very simple. There's some basic rules when you're using pre-employment testing or any type of testing, but especially pre-hire testing. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. And again, any questions, put them in the chat. Okay, so Assessments 101. So there's a couple things. Let's just get this out of the way. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but I always get the question, and most people in my business do, is it legal to use assessments? And it absolutely is. They've been used for a long time. The EEOC, the Department of Labor, does not say you cannot use a test. What it says is that they need to be valid, they need to be reliable, and they need to be job related. Validity means that it's accurate what you're testing for. So if you, I use the example that most people would understand in kind of the medical world, healthcare. If your blood sugar is high and they decide to do an x-ray, the test may be accurate and it may be a good test, but it's used inappropriately at the wrong time. So the fact that somebody's taking the x-ray to measure your blood sugar does not mean that the test is bad. It just means it's inappropriate and it's not related to the job. So a lot of times I get questions about which test should I use. I had, again, a call earlier this morning and they wanted a personality test, but when it came down to it, they really didn't want a personality test. They wanted an integrity test, which is part of that. They also wanted a test for how smart someone is, and I won't get into all the details on measuring IQ because we don't test for IQ. We do highly recommend that you test for cognitive skills and reasoning skills, which is how somebody makes a decision, how quickly they can make a decision. But a lot of times people throw this under a huge umbrella. And we talk about personality tests and what it basically came down to this morning. They were looking for a skill test for some software. So again, test assessments are pretty broad. So the number one rule is you want to make sure that whichever test that you are using actually test for what it's intended to measure. Now, with all that said, most publishers, most test publishers out there, that's something very, very easy to accomplish. People don't get in trouble because the test isn't valid. They get in trouble because it's not job related, because they're using a good test for an inappropriate reason or at the wrong time. Reliability is slightly different. What it means is if I take the test today and I take it next week and I take it next year, will I get similar results? And that's really important, because obviously if somebody could take it today and then an hour later they can get a different result, it wouldn't be very helpful in using it for your selection process. So validity essentially is, are what we're measuring the right stuff? Are the questions being asked measure the right things? The reliability is, if we test somebody over and over again, will we get similar results? And then the job relatedness is where most companies screw up. And as I said, sometimes it's just an inappropriate test that they're using. Most case law that is out there, because everybody always gets upset when you read the headlines, especially in HR and staffing world, that an employer got sued because they were using a pre-employment test. Almost every single case that is out there has been cited because somebody used the wrong test at the wrong time. They used it inappropriately, or the test did discriminate. The test will always discriminate. That's what it's meant to do. It's meant to discriminate some people against others, but not in an illegal way. It's not supposed to discriminate against ethnicity and gender. Basically, those are and ethnicity, if I can talk. Those are the kind of the three big ones, and also age. So basically, you have age, gender, ethnicity. Shouldn't discriminate. Almost all test publishers out there have done their adverse impact studies, and that's not a problem. Where the problem comes into is that the population. So if your screening process, if your recruitment process is targeting certain populations over others, then of course, if you have 80% white and 20% black, or you have, whether it's Asian or it's a 90% population that's attracted because they're male or female, and then you test that population, there's obviously going to be some adverse impact, but not because of the assessment, but because that's the pool you were tested on. So there's a number of different things, but the baseline is validity, reliability, job relatedness. Now, I'm going to add one fourth one there, which is the assessment mobile ready? Can people complete it on a mobile phone or a tablet? And this isn't required by law, but it's required if you're practical, because if you're offering an assessment that can only be completed on a desktop, you're going to exclude a significant part of your labor pool. Now, the old school thought was, and this was just a few years ago, that you can have somebody come into your office, and that's certainly the case. Or if you're hiring remote people, or you're at a career fair, or if you're hiring people nationally or domestically or even internationally, bringing them into your office is a problem, and not everybody has access to a desktop. And at one time, people used to go down to the library, but that's even a problem now because their hours are cut, and those platforms are pretty busy. And certainly, looking for top talent, you're not going to have people running down to a library to complete that. So you want to make sure that the assessment is at least able to be taken on a laptop, and some are not because of the formatting. Another area, but it's really critical, especially hiring frontline workers, because 90% or actually it's higher than that, I think it's 95% of basically that age demographic, the only device that they may have might be a smartphone. They might have one of the larger smartphones, or they may even have access to a tablet. But many people, the only device they have is a smartphone. So you want to make sure that the assessment is capable of being completed on a mobile device. The other part is what's included as this assessment. Everybody always thinks that assessments are isolated to just integrity tests or personality tests. But even according to the Department of Labor and the EEOC, even things such as observations, the evaluation of resumes, the type of application you use, the interview you have, all these are types of assessments that can be utilized. Each one of these really needs to be valid, they need to be reliable, and they need to be job related. That's where you get into trouble with interviews, because some of the questions aren't appropriate and some aren't job related. Even if they are appropriate, they may not be valid and legal to ask. So again, when we apply that valid, reliable, and job relatedness, that really should be applied to everything you use. And oftentimes the safest one happens to be the assessments that we're talking about today. Reliability and validity is also important. A lot of people just depend on the interview, and the interview alone, reliability is pretty low. So if on a reliability scale, it goes from -1 to 1. 0 is 50%. It's as good as flipping a coin. 0.9 is just slightly better than flipping a coin on one study. The best it gets is as you can see on the bottom here, is that there was one study that was done with a structured interview, meaning that it's 0.5. That would equate to about 75% correct. So even with a structured interview, you're about 1 out of 4, you will make a mistake. That's assuming that you are very skilled at being an interviewer, and as well, not you necessarily directly, but also your hiring managers or the other recruiters that work for you. And most people are not. It also depends on the savviness of the candidate. If they happen to be more skilled than the interviewer, then this number goes way down. But all things equal, the structured interview is certainly a good way to screen out people, and the reliability is certainly reasonable. One of the most standard assessments or studies that's been out there, and it's been updated several times, is the Schmidt and Hunter. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail than that, but even at that, this was their structured interview model, behavioral structured interview, and that was 0.38. So you can see that the interview, why people have, make hiring mistakes, is because of the reliability of the interview. And again, people can interview, 2 different people can interview the same person, get a different result. The candidate can interview with 2 different managers and have a different feel as well. So again, just a lot of variability, and the interview just historically has not been very reliable. Don't have to beat that dead horse. But if we add some different assessments, if you add some things like years of education, again, not very reliable, a little bit more than flipping a coin. Job experience is about equal to the standard interview, a little bit better, so it's important information to have. If you can get a good reference check, which are difficult to get, they happen to be very reliable because you're looking at work experience. Then you get into things like the conscientiousness test is really a 5-factor test, and that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit here. You're getting into a lot higher reliability. Integrity tests are good, and then adding the most predictive and the most valid happens to be using some type of a cognitive tool. So by using these in combination with the interview, if you have an interview, you have your application, you have your interview, you're evaluating their education, their experience, reference checks, and then complementing that with some additional testing, you're going to increase your success rates really almost exponentially. There's also dollar signs that are assigned to all this. And for every $10,000 that's spent on turnover based on some of the reliability factors that we talked about, basically the traditional interview, you're getting just a little bit better than 50% chance. So if you're spending $10,000 and there's a 50% chance that new hire is not going to work out, you're going to have to go back to the drawing board, hire another person. So to hire one person, you're essentially in that $19,000 range. If you had reference checks, it lowers the cost of hiring. If you do a combination of these things, nothing's perfect. We're still dealing with human behavior. There's lots of reasons that people don't succeed. Sometimes it's just, it could be their salary. It could be a life change. It could be the spouse moves. It could be a child. I mean, there's a million reasons that people do not stay in their jobs. But if you do everything right, the best combination is really this job matching approach, where there's a combination of different assessments, including the interview. What I'm recommending here does not replace the interview. It complements it. It makes it much better. So let's get into some of the other areas that we're talking about. This was a study, Are You Failing the Interview? And what it came out with some interesting numbers. 64% of managers fear they're missing key information about a candidate. That's probably true. 47%, almost half, make hiring decisions with the first 30 minutes or less. And again, for some positions that may be practical, for others it's not, but hiring managers have a busy schedule, and sometimes they don't devote the time, or they don't have the skill to devote the time that's necessary. 44% of managers claim to go with their gut. Again, we're living in a data age, predictive analytics, artificial intelligence. We're not quite there yet with assessments. We're getting there. But the basis of it is using data. And the assessments provide a ton of data. It's good data. It's predictive data. And it should be used as part of the solution and getting away with this gut instinct. And then finally, 71%, almost 3/4 of all managers who made a decision about an employee said they wish they had a second chance. They were given a second chance, they'd make a different decision. So again, all these things add up. Even on average, it's about 50%, which needs to be improved because hiring is very expensive, as you know. And when you do hire somebody and that person doesn't work out, it's a difficult labor market. There's just not a lot of people standing in line waiting to fill that role. So now let's get into some of the assessments. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. How do I evaluate whether one assessment is better than another? And why do I feel strongly about the program, the software that I'm going to suggest today? What's one of the big advantages? Well, one is one size does not fit all. For most profiles that are out there, for most assessments that are out there, every employee or every candidate, and sometimes employees, gets the same set of questions. What is handled differently, how do you come up with the sales profile versus a customer service profile versus a maintenance profile versus a nurse profile, is they get the same set of questions, but the standard in the industry for years has been then you benchmark them differently. And let's say we're doing one for nurses, you take 100 nurses or 200 nurses, they do a study on them, they identify what the patterns were in these assessments, and then they create a benchmark, which in this case would be the shaded area. Now, these are still accurate and they still work. I mean, there are some challenges with that, but essentially is what happens if you decided that extroversion is not a critical skill. It's not that important for that role, that you know that you have introverts and extroverts that could be successful. Now, there are ways to program the software that it wouldn't exclude people, but you're asking questions that are not necessarily necessary. It takes time for the candidate to complete it, and there may be some better opportunities. But what if you also decided on this type of assessment that you would like to know something different? Let's say you wanted to know, do they have negotiation skills? Let's say you wanted to know, are they caring? Are they kind? Are they compassionate? Do they have, are they attentive to detail? Well, there's no way to replace these scales because the test was validated and constructed in its entirety. So you're not allowed to not only change the questions, but you can't remove any scales. That's why I wanted to introduce you to another system. And this particular system basically allows you to customize the assessment you're using. So as you can see here on your screens, depending on the screen you're using, the wording may be a little small here. So for sales, we're measuring achievement drive, assertiveness, extroversion, go-getter attitude, self-confidence, and work ethic. Those were scales that were studied and identified to have strong correlations with success on the job. But for a CNA, for a certified nurse assistant, It was attention to detail, a can-do attitude, which is similar to achievement drive, but again, slightly different. They just have a positive attitude toward taking initiative. But it looked at caring. Were they good citizens? Were they kind? Did they have good self-control? Were they good team players? And work ethic. So sometimes there are similar scales, but for other positions, what you're looking for in someone in sales is not the same as what you might be looking for in a CNA. But if you're using many of the other testing models out there, everybody gets the same questions, everybody gets the same profile. The only thing that changes is the benchmark. In the elite system, you basically get to be able to identify the scales that are most relevant for the job. So the elite profile system, which some of you are familiar with, some of you are here just to learn a little bit more, and then there's a few new customers that are trying to figure out if this is the right system. There are 36, actually I believe there's 39 at this point. We're always adding a few, but there's more than 36, 36 job-specific or industry-specific profiles. I'll show you a few of those in just a second. There's 170 independent validated scales. What I mean by that is here's a representative 8. There's actually almost 170 more. I think it's 179 that we have now. So there's almost 170 more that you can pick and choose from. The only limitation in the assessment, and for a few reasons, it's a limitation in the software, and it's also a limitation on candidate experience. You shouldn't really be looking for more than 10 because it just takes too long to complete, especially for frontline workers. For professionals, for management, leadership, you can get away with a little bit more. But for most other jobs, you shouldn't. So you can pick and choose these 170 independently validated scales and customize that. I don't know of another system out there that allows that. Allows us to be able to do that. Now, we're not suggesting you create your own questions, but you can select scales, and again, I can provide you the list also in a PDF of all of those that are available. We're also going to talk about score validity, strength of the candidate's responses. This is also unique to Elite. Management strategies, recommended interview questions, and some reporting that you can use. This is all included in that. In the system, whether you use one test or 10,000 tests, this is all available to everyone. So what are some of the off-the-shelf tests that we have? What do we mean by off-the-shelf? These have already been pre-validated. If they fit, use it. If you're looking for sales, we have a great tool. We actually have 3 different versions of the sales. We have a sales profile, a sales hunter profile, which is taking it up a notch. We have retail sales, but we have customer service. We have call center versions. We have sales for call center. We also do cognitive testing. This is just representative of the 30 or so of the 39 tests that are available. But again, I can send you the list. If there's anything on there that you would specifically like to see, just drop a little bit of a note in the chat box or email me afterwards, and I'll be happy to send that to you. But we can also customize those. So we can take any one of these. If there are additional something additional you'd like to add, let's say you wanted to have integrity combined with Sales Hunter. There are some scales in there already that do that, but if you wanted to go a little bit more in depth, you can. So you can combine the assessments, or you can go down the list of 179 options that are available. And this only represents 20, so there's about 150 more that we can add into here. Some are redundant. Some are for positions that you probably have no need to be able to ask those, but you can pick any 10 and create your own assessment. We help you with that. I've been doing this for 24 years, and if there's people get confused because it's a lot of choices, and this isn't what you do on an everyday basis, but we're happy to put some together and really help you focus on what's most important. Again, this is just an example of what it looks like. While I'm here, the assessments are very easy to read. They don't require anything. They don't require certification. We believe that the reports should be transparent, easy to interpret. We do, for any of you who have used us in the past, we know that we're always available for support either by phone or email. And You can pick and choose, but what this means is if you fall, if the bar is green, and which means it falls at or above this green line, it means that compared to other the rest of the population that were top performers, this person mimics that, has similar tendencies or attributes or traits or abilities to people who were top performers in other organizations with our study. If it's in the yellow, it means they meet expectations. And this is critical because sometimes, especially in today's market where not everybody's going to be a star, that even if they scored, let's say in the, this is about 25%. So let's say this would be 40%, this might be 42%. So even if they only score, and I say only score in that 40%, they still had enough in them to be successful. What you need to worry about is when you see somebody here, and this is extremely low, but when people fall below the red line, it means they consistently miss expectations. Now, this person overall would probably have a passing score, and in our reports, there is a percentage score. The exact cutoff really depends on your organization. It depends on the labor market, how far you want to go down. Rule of thumb is many of our clients have determined that if they have one red area or even multiple yellow areas, it just allows you to focus the interview and the reference checks on those. So in this case, there's probably not a whole lot of need at 99% to check on attention to detail. They tend to have a good citizen, means they fit well within a culture. It's important to them. They have a good work ethic. They're going to show up every day, but they may not be great team players. Their emotional control may not be the best, but they may not be empathetic. And that's another area that we get a lot of questions on. Can you measure empathy? And the answer is yes, we can. We recommend multiple scales to be able to do that, but we can do that. There is a question, somebody says, do we have anything that might help with curiosity? And the answer is yes. We actually have one that's called investigative, but curiosity is one of my pet traits, abilities that I research all the time. And we do have the ability to look at someone's, both their ability and their tendency for curiosity. We can marry, one of the scales is open-mindedness. And that's obviously people who are open-minded. Doesn't necessarily mean they're curious, but at least they're open to new ideas. And then we can look at people who have the abilities to ask those questions. But we do have that. Most tests, I'll say most, but in this case, I just listed as many, require forced choice. And this is another important distinction. So they say, I agree or I disagree, or true or false. That's a forced choice, because you may say, well, most of the time I do, or sometimes, or I'm not sure. But if the only choices are forced choice, then, are the results as accurate as they could be? Within the elite system, we use a 5 Likert scale. It's based on strongly agree, neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree. So everyone has 5 choices. What's unique about it is, on other systems, you will not be able to differentiate. You don't get this coding. You don't get to be able to decipher if how many times they responded strongly agree or just agree. Did they waver? So people who answer strongly agree or strongly disagree will come up in the strong category, which is the dark green here. That means they were highly committed to the response. If they responded to an agree or a disagree, then they were less than committed, but it was they still had a strong preference, and they are weighted differently. So people who strongly commit or strongly disagree get a strong rating. People who agree and disagree get a lesser rating, and then people who kind of waver, fall in the middle, they were neutral, get the lowest rating. Now, the other factor is if I answer strongly agree and the most appropriate response was strongly disagree, that's a wrong answer. And that's where that would show up on their weak answer. So weak is wrong answer in the strongest pattern. The dark green, the strong, is the most reliable pattern. Most of the time, you don't get to see this. And one of the questions we get is, how do we know the person was honest when they took it? How do we know that they were committed and dedicated and that they didn't waver? The elite profile offers the ability to really take a deep dive in here. Now, you're not going to look at this all the time, but if you have somebody, if you scan the page and you see a lot of red or a lot of yellow, that's a problem. In this case, I would not go too deep into this. I mean, you can always call us and we can talk about it. In this case, this is pretty significant, where almost 60% or so is a pretty weak response. Again, another advantage. There also is an overall validity check. It's called Candidness. It's how there's a series of questions that are embedded within the profile, and it's another check to say how reliable the results. If it shows up in the green, then they're very, very reliable. If they're in the yellow, they're fairly reliable. If they're in the red, does mean that the individual, one of several things, but most predominant is, one is they either faked it out, they just put any answer down. The second most common reason for really, really low scores on this is low self-awareness. They may think they're better than they are. Again, if somebody's told that they're really kind, but maybe they come from a very rude family, or they're working in a business that has a pretty poor disposition and a lot of high temperaments. Again, if you stay around yourself by a lot of angry people, it's pretty easy to be the kindest of them all and compassionate. So one of the things, sometimes people find themselves believing that there's something and they're not as good as they think they are. And that's one of the reasons that the assessment will pick that up a bit. So there's two very strong ways to understand, was the person honest when they took it? And more importantly, are the results reliable? And one is using the strength of the candidate response, unique to the elite system. I'm not aware of any other system that gives you this level of detail without basically either paying for it or requiring the company to do some study. That's included in your portals for every assessment. And then the score validity is another factor there. And in addition, there are management strategies that are provided. So based on the scales that you used and what their response was, these were not boilerplated. There's obviously a limited number of bullets, but depending on what the score is, you will get suggestions on how to best manage that individual. Again, if you ask 10 different factors, then there's 10 different management strategies. In this case, this is just identifying 2 of them. And there's also interview questions. So again, based on the interview questions that you ask and how the person responded, you're not going to get interview questions for every scale. You're going to get interview questions for only the questions that the individual flagged. So if they were supposed to answer, if the preferred answer was strongly agreed and they answered strongly disagreed, you will get an interview question. And those interview questions, you can do a little reverse engineering and probably figure out what questions they flagged, but it will give that. And then you can use the report also as a little bit of an interview guide as well, but it will give recommended interview questions. The more questions you get on any given report, the more, probably the less of a fit that individual is. I often sort of joke and say that someone, if the standard report's 15 pages and you look at the number of report pages in the PDF and it's 25, that's probably a pretty high-risk person. You probably don't even have to look at the score. But you will have behavioral interview questions for every candidate, and they will be a little different, and they are all job-related. So again, your interviews will be much more focused, and for hiring, when these are delivered to hiring managers, then hopefully you'll be able to keep them on track as well. Did I have another question? Does the assessment, does Elite integrate? Yeah, it's a very easy solution. We can integrate this very easily into almost any ATS. The challenge integrating into another ATS or HIRS, this is just getting one software program to talk to another. So that's easy to do. The challenge is always thinking about where the workflow is. If you have different workflows for different positions, let's say that you give it at one time for for your production workers, but at a different time for managers, that has to be identified up front. So a lot of integrations are available, but it's one size fits all. That the only way that you can, everybody's going to get tested at the same time. So sometimes you don't want to test your managers until you do a second interview, but your frontline workers you want to do after the initial screening. So you have to really think about the workflow, but as far as the technical and functional aspect, very, very easy to integrate into that. We're working on a few now, and the challenges are not on our side. They're usually on the, sometimes they're on the client side. They have to figure out what they want, how they want the scores displayed. Do they want the whole report? Do they just want the score? Do they want a link that they can link over? Do they want the whole report brought in? So those are some things you have to think about ahead of time. The actual integration is not a problem. Sometimes we're working with one ATS now, and they require 6 to 8 weeks lead time. We could do it in a few days as soon as it's on the project schedule, but the ATS provider has a long delay, and sometimes they're even longer than that. So, but to answer your question is, yes, you can do it. We recommend most of the time starting without the integration. Make sure you're comfortable with the assessment, get the flow, make all your adjustments. If it's integrated and we start making changes, then you have to make sure that the changes that we make are carried over into the integration. So there's a number of factors. So we usually suggest that you use the assessment at least for a few months up front, make sure you're comfortable with it, and then again, the integration after that is fairly easy. Now, that's the report. So we can go back here. You have the scores. You have validity, you have management strategies, you have interview questions. That's included in every single report that you get. And it looks like my internet connection's unstable. Sorry if I broke up there a little bit. I'm not sure if you were able to hear me. But the best thing about this is, and I mentioned this a little earlier, assessments provide you a ton of data. So do your interviews, so do your applications. Most people don't utilize the data as well as they should, because it's difficult. You can't get it out. I work with quite a few different platforms, and it's expensive, time-consuming, and a lot of the test publishers do not make available the results if we want to get it out. Elite does, and this is great because you can go in, pick a date range. We can say, let's say we wanted to look at everybody who applied over the last 2 weeks, July 1st to July 23rd. I guess that's 3 weeks at this point. And it will create a graph like this. Names will be along the side. Everybody who completed the assessment. Scale names will be on the top. This was just a screenshot. You'll be able to see who scored in the green, yellow, and red. You can export this into a spreadsheet, into an Excel spreadsheet, and you can do your own analysis, or we're happy to help you do that as well. We also have a compatibility report. This was just added this year. It's a great report. One of the things that you can look at, one of the ways you can look at team fit. If your team's not performing up to par, you can quickly identify the 5 or 6 or 10 people that are on your team, see if there's any misfits. And in this case, you can see the red. This individual would be a challenge on this team. You can also do this with a manager. So let's say you have a manager and you want to see if which is the best fit by candidate. You can select the manager and you can select the 3 or 4 or 5 individuals, candidates, kind of do this compatibility graph. And obviously, ideally, you're looking for all green, but most of the times you're going to get some green, some yellow. When you get red, it does single out that there just may be one person, not that they're not qualified, not that they're not a good person. Maybe you need to relocate them to another team. Again, these are do-it-yourself. They're all very easy to be able to use. but we're always there to help you with the interpretation as well. Again, this is not an add-on. There's no premium cost to it. It's just included in the portal. Coming soon, by October, you're going to see, we're going to be releasing a whole new platform. It'll be all upgraded. Everything, you'll be able to continue to use the old system for a short time, but we're going to be migrating all new customers and anyone else who wants to move over to the new one. There's going to be modernized reports. There's going to be even better optimum mobile friendliness, usability. And there's going to be more analytics and benchmarking. So let me just show you a quick shot at this. This is even on my screen's a little blurry. I apologize that. But the new format, you're going to be able to see everybody's scores here. You'll be able to see everybody's name. This is also similar to what the existing looks like. This is just a modern feel. But what we're going to be able to do is you will be able to click their name if they were hired, because we currently do not know. We know who you test. We don't know who you hired, and we don't know who are the top performers. So we have to come back to you if you say, can you do an analysis to see how this is working, and are there ways to improve it? We have to get that data from you. What you will be able to do is simply come into this report, click on that they were hired, and then you're going to be able to click on the star, and that indicates that they were a top performer. From here, you're going to be able to export that data, and from there, we're going to be able to easily look for patterns. Now, one step further. Currently, even if you can identify some scales, let's say the green and yellow cutoff is 72%, but in your company, the green really goes down to 67%. We couldn't adjust that without some programming on our side and some cost on yours. What we can do now is you're going to be able to create a custom benchmark. So if your range for a particular, let's say for kindness happens to be 82% or above, let's say for conscientiousness, it's 87% or above, but for attention to detail, it's acceptable if they even score as low as 65%. That's where some of your top performers are. You're going to be able to have a custom scale. And again, we're happy to assist this, but you're going to be able to do much of this on your own. So we're looking for that to be released in the last quarter of this year. There's going to be a second upgrade in the first quarter of next year, and then there's a third one after that. So some really neat things coming along. The reports are going to look a little different. For those that are familiar with the Elite report, you'll see automatically that it's different. What the two scores here is, one is going to show how it compares to the overall benchmark. This is going to be how it compares to your company benchmark. And the more people you have in the system, the better it's going to be, but you can have as few as maybe 5 people and start to adjust the benchmark as well. And then the scoring is going to be, this blue bar is going to be what your ideal range is, and then the green, the score here is going to show what the score is, and then the color coding, even though in this case it falls into your company range, it shows that compared to the rest of the population, they would still only be in the yellow. And again, but you have different cultures, you have different teams, you have different expectations. So again, very customizable, much more compliant. What are some of the do's and don'ts? I would suggest you work with an expert. I certainly have been called that, and hopefully many of you will continue to work with me. But there are a lot of good people in the field, but there are a lot of consultants that basically get certified. Some don't even get certified. They just purchase a license. They become a reseller. It's not their main focus in their business. For those of you who know me, assessments are my business. This is what we spend 90% of the time working with our clients. We also help with recruitment, but 90% of the business happens to be on assessments. We work with a number of different platforms. This has been the business. We're not out doing tons of training on different things and coaching and even long-term consulting engagements. So on an any day basis, this is what we do from early morning till late at night. So a couple other things are critical. What I described today is allowing you to focus on what's most important, what's essential, We can test for 10,000 different things, literally 10,000 different things. But the goal is what are the 10 or fewer than 10 really critical factors that you need to know up front, and that's what you should focus on. Some of the legal rules are you need to be consistent. You can't test some people and others. Now you can test only salespeople and not not maintenance people. You can test only production people and not test managers. But if you test one production person, you can't be selective and go, oh, I know who they are, or they seem really good, or we don't have time to do it. To comply with the laws, if you test one, you should test all. And again, you're all, even if you know that they're a good fit, it brings in good data, and that's where we're moving into analytics. Use tests that enhance the interview, not to replace it. That's very important. I shared that earlier. The interview is still a critical part. We still recommend interviewing people. I get asked by clients to help interview some people. But the test enhanced that because it allows us to focus on some of the vulnerable areas. Do pay attention to candidate experience, as I've mentioned that a few times. The length of the assessment really depends on when you give it. The earlier in the process that you give it, if you give it right with the application, it should be fairly short. If you give it after an interview or before a job offer, then it probably could be a little longer, a little bit more complex. You can even offer multiple assessments because you've already had engagement and the candidate's interested in the job, they're going to be more willing. But with the less engagement and the earlier in the work in the screening process, it probably needs to be shorter, and it also needs to be mobile friendly. Do analyze your data. Assessments are very, very rich. If you're using a current system that does not allow you to export or easily manipulate the data, or even, you don't have to manipulate it, just to do a quick screen on it, you really need a different system. What are some of the don'ts? Don't choose the cheapest report out there. A lot of times that's the criteria. It needs to be cheap and fast. Sometimes cheap is good. We have some really good reports that take less than 10 minutes to do, and they are inexpensive. So it really depends on what you're trying to get, but you're not going to be able to assess 10 different factors in 7 minutes and do it accurately. And in our case, the cost doesn't matter whether you test 3 things or 10. It's a flat fee per person, or you can have a license, a subscription, so it's a flat fee for the year. But again, cheap and short doesn't always mean it's, that's the most important criteria. Don't devise your own test questions. I did say you can combine scales. When I hear companies, and this happens pretty frequently, people said, well, we decided to build our own because we couldn't decide. Those questions are not valid. And the most valuable part of an assessment, online assessment like this, there is an algorithm. There's a formula that, because one question alone doesn't knock somebody out. It shouldn't. One or two questions. It's how they work in concert together. So if you ask 10 questions, those 10 questions have different patterns. And as I showed you before, depending if they answer strongly agree or agree or strongly disagree, there's going to be different patterns, different weights. Most people aren't building that. If you are, bless you. You're doing it right. But most people just find 10 questions they want to ask, put it into a quiz, and that becomes the formula. Those aren't valid, they're not reliable, and most of them aren't job related. And get your managers not to ignore the results. We're not perfect. The interview is certainly not perfect, but they are very, very helpful. And in time, the results will always show themselves. It may not happen immediately, but I can't tell you how many calls that I get a year or two later. Wow, at first we didn't believe the results, but we went back, we pulled it out, and this person is now living the report. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes it's bad. So some pretty simple rules. Most important is, if you're going to use testing, again, I've taken it for granted that you're going to use a valid and reliable test that's been through the requirements. Everything I recommend and use has been. So we're taking to the next one. If you're going to use them consistently. Don't pick and choose who you give it to. No favorites get excluded. And be careful you don't exclude people that otherwise you may be that diamond in the rough. and do analyze your data. I can say those are probably the most important things there. And again, the don'ts are pretty transparent. Q&A, what's next? Kind of walk through this. For those on the call, some of you have accounts already. Some of you are ready to, I know, place orders. If you are, for anybody who is on the call today, we're going to be offering a little bit of a discount. Pretty substantial, 25% to get you started. You can order as much as you want. The minimum, however, is 10. If you're new and you want to test a few people, you can basically, we'll set you up for an account. You can test up to 5 people over the next 2 weeks for free. And again, you get full support, full access for that. I'll need to send you a form so you can send me the information to set that account up, but happy to set up a trial for you. Just a couple other things. We'll go back to the Q&A and I'll check the chat again. I do have a week, well, we're trying to do it weekly, getting back into that routine of a newsletter. We talk about recruitment trends, workforce trends, hiring tips. It's free. You can get it here. This will be in the handout when I send it to you as well. And then we got a weekly podcast. I know many of you are already listening to it. We're interviewing a lot of the biggest thought leaders in business, HR, recruitment. We're talking about artificial intelligence, candidate experience, testing. Tomorrow we got somebody talking about career transition. It's live. Please join us. You can go up to our website here, or w4cy.com. So let's go back. Questions. You know how to get me. Let me check. I'll check the chat one more time. Don't necessarily see anything there. So if nothing else, I have everybody's email. I will send out an address. I will send out a copy of the slides, some additional information. You will be able to, you can call me, visit the website, reply to that. Most of all, I really appreciate everybody taking their time today to be on the call. If there's anything that you thought you were going to get, you didn't, let me know. Really appreciate it. If you have any other questions, keep in touch. For those we're already doing business with, thanks. For those who we aren't, I hope you'll join our family.